Bienvenidos a todos. Nuevamente repito las instrucciones. Recuerden que este webinar tiene hoy traducción simultánea, así que quienes quieran escuchar la traducción, por favor, vayan al link inferior en Zoom, encuentran su menú de interpretación para que puedan escuchar el idioma que prefieran, español o inglés. Vamos a dar un par de minutos más para que ingresen las personas que están llegando a la sala. Perfecto. Pues bueno, vamos a dar inicio a este webinar. Me voy al canal de español para que el intérprete pueda escucharme y pueda transmitirle mis mensajes a John Dobbin, quien es nuestro invitado del día de hoy. Entonces recuerden elegir el canal. Buenas noches a todos, nuevamente bienvenidos a este nuevo webinar de Organizaciones Adaptativas. El día de hoy tenemos un invitado muy especial, John Dobbin, quien viene siendo consultor en adaptación y estructuras adaptativas y viene hoy a conversarnos un poco de este tema que está siendo muy nuevo en Latinoamérica, lo estamos empezando a escuchar y queremos pues estar con una de las personas que ha sido pionero en este tema. John Dobbin también ha sido partícipe de la construcción de objetivos de aprendizaje con ICE y Agile, que ya saben ustedes ha sido uno de nuestros invitados. Así que estamos muy contentos de poder escuchar tu charla, John. Recuerden que tenemos la caja de preguntas y respuestas para que a través de esa caja nos dejen todas sus preguntas a lo largo de la charla. Y John va a tener algunos espacios de conversación y esos espacios, por favor, déjenlos a través del chat para que podamos estar comunicándonos frecuentemente. Esos son los mecanismos de comunicación que vamos a tener. Y sin más preámbulos, John, bienvenido. Muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Good morning everyone. Oh, good evening. It is there. It's 4 a.m. in the morning in Dubai, and I believe it's, I suppose it's sometime in the evening for you. So, thank you very much for staying up late. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and then we're going to get going. And throughout the presentation, I'm going to be asking some questions. And this is really just to make sure that you're following and keep your mind engaged. And so, drop your questions in the chat and they'll be read out and off we go. So, and if I'm going too fast or if you don't understand, if you want me to stop, have a chat to the moderators and we can be quite flexible and agile the way we do it. So let's, someone needs to let me share the screen. I can't share my screen for some reason.
Okay. Ahora
okay, try it now. That's all right. We'll stop another computer's sound share. Yes, we'll continue that one. Okay, so can you hear me? Is everything okay? All right. I actually can't hear anybody else. So
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, I'm off and running. So once again, hi, and what the talk is going to be called Enabling Emergence. So I'm going to be introducing you to a very high level view of adaptive organization design, because that's all we really have time for. We can't get too detailed. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be looking at the most importantly is how do we look at organizational design? What framework do we use? What intellectual framework are we going to use? And why it's so important to get that right. We're going to be looking at the characteristics of complex adaptive systems, which is the framework which I'm going to suggest that we design in. We're going to look at the nature of adaptation, from biological adaptation as well as organizational adaptation and similarities. We're going to look at the idea, that it might be new to you, of adaptive information, which is very, very important when we're designing organizations. We're going to see what it means to have networks of adaptive agents in organizations instead of hierarchies. We're going to be looking at teams as the locus, as the center of our design practice. We're going to very briefly look at the concept of collective intelligence. And if we get time, we'll also talk about collective computation. So the first thing we have to be really careful about is our framework of understanding. And so what we're looking at, what I mean by that is how we view the world, or how we view the problem that we're trying to solve. And so in this beautiful diagram is a view of the cosmos, of the solar system, done by a cartographer in 1568. And this is Ptolemy's Geocentric View. So what that means is that the map of the solar system has the Earth in the center of the universe, and the different planets and the sun surrounding that. And this was the dominant worldview. Now, this is interesting because this was in 1568. But in 1541, Copernicus had released his idea of actually having a heliocentric view, the view that we currently adopt now. And he looked at the problem from a different way, because this particular diagram is showing all the planets going nice and neatly around. But at the time when the telescopes were getting more sophisticated, the planets were doing some strange things. They weren't going around in nice circles. They were kind of moving from year to year, and sometimes they would seem to go backwards. And so mathematicians and the astronomers at the time had to create quite complicated workarounds. They had things like epicycles in order to explain this. And then along came Copernicus, and he wasn't the first person to propose a sun-centered view. One of the first ones was a Greek astronomer around about 300 AD, and also an Arabic astronomer had also come up with it. But the Copernicus is the one he's very famous for. Now, we have to go back in time and think about what it was like back then. We didn't understand what gravity was. We looked up at the sky and we saw stars, and the astronomers gave us a model of the world. And that's how we viewed the world. We viewed the world as being, the Earth as being in the center, and all the stars and the planets revolving around it. And then along came Copernicus and said, no, the sun is the center. And he held back for many years. He was so scared of actually introducing his ideas that he didn't publish for several years. Anyway, in 1541, he published his book, his paper, and then slowly the world started to change. We started to change our worldview. But it took quite a long time. And one of the leading astronomers at the time was one of the biggest critics, and one of the people that said, no, this is just not going to work. Like, his calculations are very good, but how can the Earth, this great big hulking lazy body, move around the heavens like the ethereal torches? And what he means by ethereal torches were comets. And so in that worldview, even the best astronomer at the time could not imagine how the Earth could possibly move around the sun. And remember, this was 150 years before Newton came out with the theory of gravity. So we didn't understand gravity at this stage either. Now, the reason that I'm telling you all of this is that in organization design, we also have a dominant framework of thinking. Most or 90% of organization designs are dominated by the framework of bureaucracy. And bureaucracy is an interesting word. It comes from the French, and it was invented in 1751 by Jean-Claude Marie Vincent, who was a politician. And he complained all the way back then about the problem of bureaucracy. And he called it the rule of the desks. So the word bureau comes from the French word for desk. And so the rule of the desk was the problem of all of these people sitting in desks, moving paper from desk to desk in order to get the transactions done. Now, this is back in 1751, a long time before we had computers. And in order to process documents such as land settlement, and I'm going to buy my house off you, we're going to do a contract, and that contract's going to go to the government to be verified, and there's going to be some money exchanged. All of that had to be done by paper. And this is before photocopies as well. So the documents had to be transcribed manually. And this is how we built the idea of bureaucratic structures. But still today, a long time later, this is still how we run our businesses. And if we see organization design through the interpretive framework of a bureaucracy, we're not going to understand how organizations really work. We actually need to change our framework of understanding. We actually need to see how organizations work as they really do, rather than from this very old-fashioned viewpoint, which is the bureaucracy. And what is that? What is that framework? So I would propose to you, so this is 100 years ago today, this year, Max Weber very famously wrote a paper on bureaucracy. And he said, and he very clearly articulated that the more that we dehumanize people, the more that we turn people into objects and not humans, the better bureaucracy is. Because at the lower levels, you really don't want people to think. You really want people just to move paper from one side of the desk, perform their function, and move it on to the other. And that's really a way a lot of organizations work now. And so I would propose, and some of the other my colleagues, that propose that there is a better framework to interpret organizations. And this is a picture of an organization too. And this is came out doing the rounds last week on social media. And this is it's not an artist drawing. This is a 3D X-ray of a eukaryote cell. So the same type of cells that we find in our bodies. And this is the detail of just one cell. And in this, we can see the organization of its organelles, of all of the little parts that make up a single cell. Now, there's 15 trillion of these cells in our body. Now, how we understand how these organize, we're still learning, but really we found the science of complex adaptive systems to be enormously helpful. And so the science of complex adaptive systems is looking at how all of these different components at this level, at the level of a cell, or at the level of an organ, or at the level of, say, a human being, or even at the level of a group of people, a tribe, or at the level of a company, or the level of a city, or the level of the world. All of these things are complex adaptive systems. which work better. And so these cells, they organize themselves, they process information, they replicate, they do collective computation, and they do all of this without any bosses, without any bureaucracy at all. And they do it very well. If they didn't do it very well, we wouldn't even be here talking this morning. And so the question is, how do they work? And what can we learn from complex adaptive systems? What can we learn about that from them in order to create better organizations and more functional organizations? And this is the domain of adaptive organization design. So it's about, yes. Right. Yep. How's that? I'll get that. I'll put that very close. So what I was just saying then is if the domain of complex adaptive systems is about designing organizations with the same rules, with the same mathematics, if you like, that keeps complex adaptive systems at all different levels working. And so now what I'd like to do is just like to see where everyone is at in terms of understanding what a complex adaptive system is. So in your chat, what do you think are some of the key features of complex adaptive systems? So just think about what you think are some of the design features that make up a complex adaptive system and put them in the chat, and someone can read them out to me. Oh, I can't see them. Very good. I can go home now. You know what we're talking about. Very good. Okay. So some of these words, autonomous, self-managing, self-organizing, that's exactly what we're talking about. And so now a question that for organization design is how do we manipulate, or how do we shape these organizations in the way that we want to? But first of all, let's have a look at just 4 key features of complex adaptive systems. And these 4 features are enough for us to learn. We don't need to go too much deeper than this. And so someone already said this. They said that there's autonomy. Now, autonomy, when we're talking about autonomous, we're talking about the agent. And so complex adaptive systems are made up of agents. So the agents inside the cells were organelles, and they have got their own autonomy. They don't have a manager. They just work inside the cell. The cells themselves are autonomous. They work by themselves. Here we can see some ants, and we know that these ants or termites with very small brains can work without any central management, and they can produce very complex structures. They can produce, termites have known to produce nations and cities the size of large countries that go for 4,000 years, and they've got air conditioning, and they've got multiple levels, and they can manage the oxygen levels and the carbon dioxide levels in their structures. And they do this all without a boss. So they're all working in a self-managed way. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we get organizations to be self-managed? The next feature, I think someone said this as well, that they're adaptive. I'm going to go into this a fair bit today. And adaptive means that we're adapting to an environment. We don't just adapt we don't just mutate randomly, we're adapting to the environment. And here is our fish that lives at the bottom of the ocean. And somehow that fish has evolved a light that it hangs off its nose in order to attract prey. And the prey gets attracted to the light and it gobbles up the prey and it lives. Now, it's an amazing adaptation. It's somehow found a way to live in a very harsh environment. And this is a feature of all complex adaptive systems. The next feature is a little bit, this often gets people confused, but the agents interact with each other in a non-linear fashion. So the best way to describe non-linear fashion to you is to describe what a linear interaction is. So that's my city, that's Dubai, and that's what it looks like at the moment. And if I wanted to go to the beach, which is about 10 kilometers away from here, if traffic was a linear system, I could drive at 120 kilometers an hour and I could get to the beach in 10 minutes. Now, when there's no one on the road, I might get there in 10 minutes, but if there's traffic, then there's all sorts of things can go wrong. There could be an accident. I could get behind a truck. I might decide to speed. And so in order to calculate my time, how long it's going to take me to get to the beach, I have to deal with lots of different variables. And what that's all non-linear means. It means that I'm dealing with lots of interacting variables. And in order to calculate what the system is going to do is not a simple linear mathematical operation like you learned in high school. That's it. And all we have to know is that everything we do in organizations tends to be non-linear. There tend to be lots of moving parts interacting with each other. And finally, the thing about complex adaptive systems is that behavior emerges from the interactions of the agents. And so there's a very nice picture of a brain. And our brains are very good examples of a complex system which produces emergent behavior. So our neurons and our neurochemistry is acting quite independently inside our brains. And what happens out of these interactions is the emergence of thoughts and ideas and language, emotions, our visions, everything that we see and interact with the world, everywhere we model the world, is an emergent property of the interaction of autonomous brain cells. And so that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about a complex adaptive system. So this is the framework that we want to design organizations in. We want to create organizations that are complex adaptive systems, and we want to start to move them away from bureaucratic structures, which are non-adaptive. So what I want to focus on today is really the word adaptive. And what's really important to understand is that things, agents, adapt to their environments. And so here's a classic example. We've got the peppered moth. Now, during the Industrial Revolution in England, biologists noticed that the moths were changing. And the populations that were around industrialized cities like Sheffield and Leeds, where they were producing lots of steel, where they had a lot of coke mills and they had a lot of pollution, the moths were getting blacker, they were getting darker. Now, this is because the moth gets eaten by birds and it can camouflage itself against a tree. So the original moth, the white-bodied peppered moth on the left-hand side, was able to camouflage very well in the trees. But in the trees that are near the steel plants, they were getting blackened from all the soot. And so the moth, over a course of time, slowly developed this mutation. And so the population adapted to these forests, which were blackened by the soot, through Darwinian selection. So one moth would have several children. The darker of those children would not be eaten by the birds because they were well camouflaged, and they would then go off to reproduce, and slowly those moths got darker and darker. The moths only got darker where the forests were black. And so here's a perfect example of nature or a moth species adapting to their environment. And it's really important if we're talking about complex adaptive organizations to think about what is the environment that they're adapting to, because that's key. So I'm going to give you a hypothesis, and this is the central hypothesis of adaptive organization design. And so the hypothesis is that organizations that adapt to their environments will thrive, and those that do not will perish. And this is the whole point of what we're trying to do. We're trying to design organizations that will thrive in their environments and to stop them perishing. And as we know, the environments that organizations exist in today, the marketplaces, societies, they're changing a lot. I mean, technology is changing, economies are changing, there's new competitors all the time, and so their environments are changing. And we're going to look at this in a moment. So the best way for us to understand how agents or species interact or adapt to their environments is to take from ecology the concept of a fitness landscape. And so what it says, what this diagram is saying, is that there are different traits that can have a high fitness or a low fitness in an environment. And so in our dark forests, one of the traits that was very fit was melanation, was the dark pigment in the moth. And maybe the other trait was the wing size. Now, the wing size for the moths didn't change. The only trait that changed was the color of its wings. And in the particular fitness landscape of the forest, black wings were considered to have a high fitness. And so that's all very well and good. How does that translate to products and to businesses? Well, organizations have got traits too. So you might want to think about a product that you use. One of the ones that I like to think about is the Kindle. So I use my Kindle a lot. And one of the traits of the Kindle is its screen resolution, like how good it is, or how easy it is to read. And another trait is its size. And if I had a reader which had a much higher resolution screen, then it would probably get heavier. But the Kindle is just perfect. This is the sweet spot of just having the right size and the right resolution, and that's why it's so popular. So let's look at this a little bit more. So think about a company that's got lots of products, and those products are like those little dots. And what they're doing is they're trying to crawl their way up into the fitness landscape. And so in a market, the fitness landscape is dictated by the desires of the customer. What is it the customer likes in this particular product? In a service organization, it's not quite so dynamic. So a government organization, if you want to get your driver's license renewed, it's not so dynamic. So they don't have to compete like this very much at all, which is why a lot of government organizations aren't really going down this adaptive organization path. But I work a lot with telecommunications companies and banks, and their products are in a very dynamic environment. They've got competitors changing the expectations all the time, and they have to release new products every week in order to keep up, new pricing models, new packages. And so these can be seen like little species that are going out into the market, but the market's changing all the time. And so what we need to do is we need to evolve our products in order to be always fit in terms of the market. And what we're going to find is we also have to evolve. In order to do that well, we actually have to have the whole organization adapting all the time as well. So just to just keep going on this a little bit, let's have a look at just a quick example. So at the moment, we're using a product, Zoom, and this is just a hypothetical fitness landscape. But one of the reasons that Zoom really became much more popular than some of the other products, and remember, WebEx was around for a long time, and so was Skype, and Teams was quite new. But what was really successful with Zoom is they got the latency down. So the latency is the delay between me sending my voice packet and my video packet to you and you getting it. And so there's very little time delay with Zoom. They really crunched that algorithm. And they also had to be interoperable. So they had to be interoperable with I'm using an Apple and I'm using Keynote, and it works perfectly well. And because Zoom really got these two traits just right, the product took off. And that's why Zoom in the last couple of years has gone from a niche product to be the dominant video platform. And so that gives you an idea of what adaptation is like in terms of business. Now, how does all that work? So what we find when we study complex adaptive systems is the flow of information. Now, don't worry about the maths. I'm not going to go into that in the evening for you. It's much too hard. But what I wanted to do is just to show you that we're not just making things up here. This is all got fairly rigorous science behind it. We can model it in mathematical models. And because we can model it in mathematical models, we can really start to tune organizations. Now, as an adaptive organizational designer, you don't need to know the maths, really. If you do, it can help. But what we need to do is understand what the maths is saying. And so what this maths is saying, that all adaptive processes are minimizing the uncertainty of the agent about the state of the world. And so if we think about our Moth, then the information that we're talking about with the Moth was the genetic information, the information that the genes were carrying in order to tell the Moth's proteins what to do. And through the process of Darwinian adaptation, that information was found through brothers and sisters being eaten by birds that the darker skin was going to be more successful. And so what evolution did is it minimized the state of uncertainty. So it transferred information from the environment, what colors are going to give the Moth camouflage, into the agent, into the Moth. And what we find as a general rule is that the agents are maximizing the amount of information they possess about the worlds in which they live. And so this is a bit of a very different idea. And if we've come from bureaucracy and we're going into the world of complex adaptive systems, this is a hard concept. So we have to spend some time with it. But what we're going to do is we're going to have to think about how information gets transferred from the external environment, from the world, into the agent. Now, just to repeat, the agent can be anything that we're studying. So an organization can be an agent if we're looking at the system at the level of an economy. So if we look at all of the different businesses in an economy, we can call that business or that organization an agent, and we can find out what's happening with that agent from that level. If we zoom in a level, if we zoom into the organization, we might call a team an agent. We might, obviously, we call an individual an agent, but there's other agents that are also interacting in organizations. There's computer systems and there's code. Those are also agents. There's policies. And so it's all the different parts, if you go back to the image of the cell, that make up the organization. And once we get into it, once we really start to understand how these systems work, it's very much about how information is flowing from the outside of the agent, from the outside world, into the individual. So we're going to look at this a bit, because it's a difficult concept. We're going to look at it a bit more closely. So what I want you to do is, I'm going to show you some slides in a minute. I want you to think about the concept of adaptive information, because this is really important. So in the example of the moth, the adaptive information, the information which enabled the moth to successfully adapt, was the color of the wings, and that information existed in its DNA. So its DNA changed, and then it created the wing color. In the case of Zoom, the adaptive information was, how do we get this latency down? So it first of all, so the Zoom understood that latency was very important, and it got that information from studying how video and sound transmitted. So it was they were transferring scientific information in order to make their systems better. And they also needed to understand information about what type of systems people were interacting with. So for Zoom, the adaptive information was very much about the market, and also some science and technology about how software works. So now what I want you to do is, in your chat, I'm going to walk you through the different layers of information. And I know this is difficult. I realize this is difficult. So don't worry if you don't know. There's no right answers or wrong answers. But I'm going to walk you through some slides. And at each level, we're going to think about how information is being transferred. And maybe you can just read some answers out as they come. So in an organization, the highest level is the market, and our organization exists within its market. And so what are some ways that an organization can find information in the market and transfer it? What sort of information do you think is important for the organization in order to adapt? And so you should be just typing some ideas now. So what are some ideas that are coming up? So yeah, so working from home is more of a response. But what is so it's a good problem. But what does the organization need to know? What information does the organization need to know about whether that working from home is going to work or not? And so let's just brainstorm some ideas. What else does the organization need to know to adapt to this COVID world? Clients' needs. Yes. Beautiful. Yep. Okay. Yep. 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 So that's right. So now we're saying, so what is it? So we're asking ourselves, what adaptive information does the organization need? So it's looking outside of the organization, exchange rates, customer needs, emerging technologies, and we want to transfer that information into the organization. We want to create that, and that we need to get that information to the place where it needs to work. So now let's think about, we're now a team, we're one team of many teams, we're just one team. And so we don't need to know all of that information, maybe, or do we? But that team also needs to know information about the organization. So now think about, from the team view, what does the team need to know about the organization, about what the organization is doing so that it can do its work? So for example, you might think that you are a technology team, or you might think that you're the HR team, or you might think that you're a product team, or you might think that you're the leadership team. So think about what type of things that you need to know, not just about the world, but also about what's going on inside your organization in order for you to adapt to the way your organization is adapting. So what are some of the ideas there? Yeah. Yep. Okay. All good. So now you're starting to see and we can see some of that language was very much about orientation. What's the organization doing? And what we're going to find as we drill into this is that the information that we're going to most need to know about in a team structure is what other teams are doing. In a complex, in a cell, or if you think about our own bodies, we've got kidney cells and liver cells and heart cells, and somehow they have to work together. And so it's very interesting to see how, in a complex adaptive system, how the teams understand, each other. And we use some of the words about objectives and things like that. But what we'll find with complex adaptive organizations is that that those answers are correct, but those are also become emergent properties. So objectives become emergent properties of the team. As I said, this is an introduction. It's very hard, but we want to go one more layer now, and we want to go you. You are inside a team. Now, what do you need to do in order for you to be able to adapt to your team's change? So, for example, working from home is a big adaptation response. So what do you need to know so that you can adapt to the changing conditions in your team? Any ideas? That's okay. New members? Yep. So I'll give you a hand. I'll give you a hand because this is very difficult. But you might want to know how they're feeling. You might want to know if they're okay. If they're worried about COVID. You might want to know their emotional state. And so what I've given you here is just a very, very broad canvas of how we need to think about complex adaptive organizations. So they're made up of different layers and levels. And as I said, this is an introduction. So don't worry if it's going to be hard. The whole idea of doing a 2 or 3 day course is that we drill into these concepts quite deeply. So what do you think that is, that diagram is? So what do you think that diagram is? It's a network, but what do you think it's showing? Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. Oh, that's close. That's close. What that is, we are looking at an actual picture with the names removed of the organizational chart. It's the organizational chart of a company called Morningstar, which is a tomato processing company in California. So they do not have an organizational chart with a CEO and your different hierarchies. That is their organizational chart. The different colors are representing different regions, different parts, different offices. And the linkages are representing commitments that each individual is making to each other individual. And so their organization it's a very successful organization, very dynamic, and this is changing all the time. And so what they have done is they are representing their organization through a network in real time. And in that, there's no hierarchy, there's no bureaucracy, there's no bosses, there's no managers. These are just people working together, bound by mutual commitments. And it's dynamic. These commitments are changing all the time. I commit to process, this many tomatoes per day, or I commit to putting out so many marketing campaigns per day, or I commit to whatever it is these commitments are. And the commitments are not to the organization, they are with each other. And so it would take another hour for us to go through how all this works, but this is the future of organizations. And so organizations are no longer, in the future, they're not going to become bureaucracies. They're going to become networks of adaptive agents. Those particular agents are all human beings. Now, if it gets too complicated, what we can do is we can start to represent these different teams and different groups and different relationships in what's called a hypergraph, where we kind of bundle up some of these ideas. So this is, if I just go back, you can see the red and the blue. So we might want to simplify that diagram by using a hypergraph. And a hypergraph is just simply a way to map very similar networks or very similar agents or nodes together. And so really this is, when we're talking about organizational design and we're designing a complex adaptive organization, this is what the organizational charts are going to look like. We're not going to have hierarchical trees anymore. This is what it's going to look like. And they're going to be changing quite regularly as the organization adapts. Now, once we understand that the organization is a network of adaptive agents, we can start to analyze our organization. Now, what this diagram is this is an analysis that's been done of an organization, and it's mapping collaboration networks. And so what each person does is they have a little computer monitor that they, a little web page, and we do a quick survey. It takes about 10 minutes, and we ask everyone to tell us who are the people that they collaborate with most often in their organization. And so they've got a staff list, and they go, okay, I collaborate with this person, this person, this person, this person. The next question is what type of collaboration they do with that person. So is it to obtain approval or sign off? Is it to obtain knowledge? Is it to provide some sort of support, like knowledge support? Is it for friendship? What is it that we're doing here? And then the last question is, how important, 1 to 10, how important is each person that you've identified for you to get your job done? And then what we do is we can see how, instantaneously, how people are really collaborating. And what we can do is, once we start to understand the language of networks a bit, we can start to see that there are silos forming or cliques forming. The collaborations might not be happening between two different groups. We might need to put some intermediate people in here. And so once we can see what the organization is actually functioning like, we can then start to make designs to make it better, to make it more robust. Now, I don't have time to go into all the different topologies, but if you can imagine, you've got some, the red dots on the left, you've got the yellow dots on the right over there. Now, they're not really collaborating together because they're only really linked by, really one line, one bridge, and that's very vulnerable. If that person is sick or is fired or quits, then there is no real collaboration going on between those parts of the network. So as organizational designers, we would go in and we would say, we need to build stronger connections between the red and the yellow parts of the organization in order for us to function. And so once we see the organization as a network, and each of those agents are adaptive, then we can start to just simply create network designs that optimized to fulfill the objectives of the organization, what the organization is trying to do. So how do we do that? So if I just go back a second, what we can see there is the yellow clusters and the red clusters. We can kind of call them teams. They might not be formal teams, but they are. And what we find is that really globally, about 83% of people all workers are on at least one team, and 64% of us are more than one team. So really, humans mostly work in teams. And so when we are talking about adaptive organization design, the easiest way to do this is to start to design good teams. Now, what makes a good team? We'll look at some of the ideas, but one of the other things we also have to do is we have to create things called alignment teams. And so in my little diagram here, we've got 3 teams. We've got a green team, we've got a purple team, and we've got a blue team. Now, these teams might be, for example, one might be IT, one might be marketing, and one might be sales. And at the moment, they might be working on some sort of a project together, and they need to align. They need to align their work. So how do you align work if you don't have bosses? Well, you create an alignment team where a member of each of the other teams meets. They have another team, and what's called an alignment team or a fusion team or a meta team, if you like. And they come together in order to coordinate and to share information. And so what you'll find is that you get the structure where these adaptive teams, these network of teams, are all working together. Now, these alignment teams, they might only last for as long as a project. So they might come and go all the time. And some of these teams might be for strategy, some of them might be for innovation, some of them might be for whatever the organization is trying to do. And so when we're talking about adaptive organizations, what we're really talking about is a network of adaptive agents. And most of the time we're working at the team level. So a network of adaptive teams. So then we say to ourselves, what do we need to do to improve the performance of the organization? Well, what we can do is we can start to improve the performance of teams. So what we want to do is we want to be able to take information from the outside of the world, we want to process that information and turn it into some sort of knowledge or output. And one of the first dimensions that we look at is the idea of collective intelligence. So collective intelligence is the general ability of a particular group or team to perform well across a wide range of different tasks. And it comes from the idea of general intelligence. So general intelligence is humans' ability to do well across a wide range of different tasks. So here's another question. This is the last question for the evening. How do we maximize the collective intelligence of teams? So what are some of the ideas? So just put in your chat. How do you think we might improve the collective intelligence of teams so that we can improve the collective intelligence of the organization as a whole? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so all of these, your team, great. So we're all thinking about the right way. Yep, that's great. Now, I'm going to give you, so there's been research done and there's ongoing research done, but some of the answers are quite surprising. So in general, I'm going to give you the answers of what the research is saying, and all of those things are what people said. You're on the right mark. But here is what the research says. So the first thing, increase the number of women on your team. This is a standout. We know that teams with more women on them are collectively more intelligent. Now, isn't that interesting? The other thing is to distribute conversation. In other words, making sure that everyone on the team is contributing their opinions. Now, I'm referring to a particular body of research. There's also some other research that says not only do you want to distribute conversation, but you also want to have the right level of cognitive diversity with people with slightly different ideas and different perspectives on the knowledge, but not too much. And the last thing is to improve the social perceptiveness of the team members. So this is very weird, isn't it? Now we're talking about how do we, what are we doing? So let's look at the first one. So what it says there, the yellow line is the average collective intelligence. And if the team is all male, then it's below average. You put one female on the team. This is on average. It's not on every team, but this is just on average. And the collective intelligence comes up. And then we see, you go all the way over where you're starting to get the majority female, your collective intelligence is going up quite a lot. And then interestingly, it peaks at when there is just one male on the team. When you've got most females and one male, that is the maximum amount of intelligence. Now, it's a great discussion that we can have another day is about why that happens. There's all sorts of different ways, the rationales, but it's interesting that it takes this particular gender diversity in order to get maximum intelligence. And then you see if it's all females, it comes down again. Now, this is really interesting, isn't it? What is it really telling us? What is it really saying? Is it what's special about females here? Well, the other two things might give us a clue. Now, before I go into the other two things, I want to talk about cognitive diversity. So cognitive diversity is how we kind of process information. So I've got a mathematics degree, and so I will tend to look at problems through a mathematical lens. I've got a colleague, and he has got a drama. He comes from the world of dramaturgy, and so he tends to look at problems from a performance management or a what's the Spanish word? Dramaturgical, so like a drama, like actors. Other people come with artistic, other people come from very IT. And so you want a fair bit of cognitive diversity, but not too much. Because if you get too much, then everyone spends all their time trying to understand each other. And there's a kind of an overload that happens. Now, in terms of distributing conversation, here's a little diagram of some people, and the size of the yellow dots is how much they're talking, and the size of the orange diagrams is how much they're interacting with each other. And so what we're seeing here is that really 3 people in the team are basically dominating the conversation. So all the conversation is really happening between 3 people, and there's 4 people that are really not doing anything. So they're not really part of the team, they're just sitting there. And so what we want to do is when we see this, and there's a whole language that's in this diagram. So the yellow dot is representing the amount of energy that's being put into the team, and the orange lines are about level of engagement. And so when we start to do design, we really start to look at how these team dynamics are working. And so what we do here is saying, well, we're really diminishing our collective intelligence because there's 4 people who are not engaged in the conversation. So we need to work out ways to get them engaged or get them off the team. If they're not of doing any good, get them off. So this is how we start to change organizations and manage organizations in a complex, adaptive way. The last one is, about collective intelligence, is this idea of social awareness. And so one of the measures for social awareness is what's called reading the mind in the eyes test. And so we can give a little test. You can do it online. I can send out the link, tomorrow with some course notes, and you can do this yourself. And you're presented with a pair of eyes, and you have to try to tell us what the emotions are. So you can see that each of those 6 people have got different emotions, but what are those emotions? Now, it turns out that females are much better at males than reading different people's emotions. And so that gives us a clue of why female teams tend to perform better, because they're better at reading each other's emotions. So that means that they're better saying, is there anything wrong, John? You're holding back, or you seem to be angry, or you're upset. And this is the type of thing which gets knowledge flowing, gets information flowing inside teams. And so what we're going to do, so how are we going for time, by the way?
Hola, John. Vamos, yo creo que
Hi, how are we going for time? How much time have I got left?
si pudiéramos tener 10 minutos para abrir preguntas, estaría buenísimo. Y los invitamos a todos los que están participando y están aquí a dejar sus preguntas en la caja de Q&A para poder abrir esa sección con John después de que terminemos la conversación.
Okay, so you want me to do 10 minutes and then Q&A, or do you want me to go to Q&A now?
Así es. Así es. 10 y Q&A.
Okay, great. No problem. Yes, that's okay. It's just the next 2 sections I can go quite fast or quite slow. So, all right. So I want you to think back to the idea of adaptive information. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get information to flow from one agent to another, or from the outside of the world into the organization. And key to information flowing is information theory. And this is a diagram from what's called Shannon information theory. And what it very simply says is that in any information flow, there is a source and a transmitter and a signal and a receiver and a destination. So right now, I am the source and I'm sending you a message. I'm transmitting that message to you, and you're receiving it, or your brain is receiving it, to be fair. And there is noise. Now, what type of noise is interfering with the message at the moment? So I am unable to communicate with you perfectly because, first of all, I have to find the right words in order to describe a concept. And I may not do a very good job of that. And then I have to send those words via voice, which is being now transmitted over the internet to you, and you're receiving it. Now, if some of you have got an internet connection problem, or if I get one, or my microphone wasn't close enough like before, you're not going to get the signal. But more than that, my native language is English and yours is Spanish. And so there is going to be noise. And what we find in all adaptive systems is that there's lots of different noise. And so what we want to do is we want to understand what those noise sources are. So some of the noise sources, now one of them is defer in a team, it's deference, which means that I might not speak up. I might let a more senior person say something. That means that I might have a thought, and that thought, I don't even send it to the team because I don't think that my voice is wanted. So that information, which I might have, and it might be really important information, like it might be information about the expansion rate of a gasket in a space shuttle. And I'm referring now to the space shuttle crash, which was due to a gasket because one of the engineers didn't speak up. He didn't say, I don't think this is going to work. He just didn't speak, and the space shuttle disintegrated. So by not saying things is the first problem that we have with communication in teams. Mitigated speech means to sugarcoat the speech. And so in the study of airlines, there was a culture of the captain is king, and the co-pilots were very scared to speak up to the captain. And so they would say things like, instead of saying, there's ice on the wing, do not take off, they would say, gee, it's pretty cold outside. And the captain wouldn't understand what they're saying, and the plane would crash. So mitigated speech is a noise source. Inaccessible language. So I have probably introduced to you new language, new concepts that you're having difficulty with. So the idea of adaptive information, it is going to be very difficult to you if you understand the first time around. And this makes communication a problem. Closed-mindedness. You might think, no, hierarchies are the best way to go. I don't care about complex adaptive systems. It's all rubbish. I'm going to stick to hierarchies. So your mind is just blocking out any other information. There might be bias. So, you might be a senior manager and you're getting a lot of rewards from keeping a hierarchy. You're getting a lot of the a lot of status and a lot of money. So you might not want to change your organization. You might want to hang on to the way it used to be. So you might have a bias. Or there's simple inattention. People are mind wandering, or they're looking at their mobile phones. So in an organization and in a team and even an individual, there's all of this communication problem. And when we're designing organizations, what we have to do is we really have to start to go into how information is transferring around the organization. And we have to do interventions and design changes to change, to reduce the noise. You can never get rid of it. And in fact, sometimes some noise is good, which is the subject of a whole different discussion. But we need to understand this Shannon information. It's very, very important to understand that organizations are transferring adaptive information to the people, the teams that can do something with it. And if that information gets lost, then we can't adapt. So the next thing to think about is that information is coming into a group, into an organization, and that group is then creating some behavior. And we spoke about collective intelligence. But really the more important concept, that's an important concept, the more important concept is collective computation. So if we get information, we might be able to, collective intelligence will help us interpret that information. But now we actually have to do something with it. We have to turn it into a decision. And so if we're to look at our organizations, go back to Zoom, they were receiving information from the outside world. The teams were receiving information from the organization, and they had to make decisions in order to output something. What the organization did is they output a product. And in this case, it was behavior. So they allocated funds, they organized engineers, and that's the behavior, and they output a particular product. And so if we can think about organizations as a collective computational system, and all of the teams within that organization as collective computational systems, what we need to do is start to understand what the circuits in those systems are, who is talking to whom, how are decisions being made, what policies are affecting the decisions, and what are the algorithms that are working. So is this a consensus type of vote, or are we listening to the dominant voice? And again, this is a subject which I could go into for hours, but I just wanted you to just think about organizations and teams as a collective computation system. And so when we're designing organizations, what we want to do is we want to start to work with mechanisms. And when I talk about a mechanism, I'm talking about, it could be a heuristic, or it could be a rule, or it could be an algorithm, or it could be a workflow. A very simple mechanism is how you share cake. So if I was to share my birthday cake with you, and if I cut the cake into, I don't know, there's 200 people on this line. So if I was to cut the cake into 200 pieces, and I was greedy, I might cut myself a bigger piece. But there's a very simple mechanism design where if I was to have a little rule to say the person that cuts the cake is not the same person to hand out the pieces, then there's no incentive for me to cheat. And so the mechanism there is a simple rule to say whoever cuts the cake does not hand out the pieces. So this is what I mean by mechanism design. So let's look at some ideas. So one of the things we might want to do in order to improve our behaviors, we might want to start to think about optimizing the cognitive diversity on our teams. We might think about how do we make our teams more cognitively diverse. And we might do that. We might think about moving people around in teams a bit more. We might think about changing our recruiting so that we're not getting the same type of MBA students, the same type of people all the time. We want to get people with very different ideas. And so that can become a mechanism, the idea of getting cognitive diversity in the room to improve the output or improve the behavior of a team and the organization. We might want to improve peer accountability. So if we're going to take managers away, we need to teach the skills so that we can hold each other accountable to our promises. And so that mechanism becomes a social mechanism, becomes some social rules, and becomes some skills for the organization to take accountability away from managers and to distribute it into the organization. In order to do that, we might want to improve our dialogue skills. We might want to teach active listening, for example. We might think that the best way to improve the behavior of a particular team is to teach active listening, to get those conversations flowing. that these are the type of organizational design interventions and behavior design components that we're talking about. We might want to increase the psychological safety of teams. We might want to work with the teams so that people are very free to speak up and say anything and encourage that. We might want to increase the velocity of ideas. And so what we might do, we might split a design team into 3 smaller teams and have them work on the same problem quite separately, for a week, and then come together and look at that idea, look at those ideas together. So these are ideas saying, if we are not adapting quickly enough, what can we do to come up with better ideas quicker? So these are some of the objectives of organizational design. Excuse me. And we might want to increase interaction density. We might want to make sure that different parts of the organization are talking to each other. We want to build bridges between marketing and sales, or build bridge between IT and the customer. So all of these type of things we're going to start to work with in order to make this complex adaptive organization work better, adapt to this environment, and produce new outputs. One other one, we might want to start to increase our external exploration. How do we empower everyone in the organization to bring ideas from the outside of the organization into the organization and get them circulating around? With that, I will now hand over to the Q&A session. I suppose I'll stop sharing my screen, and I look forward to your questions.
Gracias, John, por este espacio y por estos conceptos que son súper claves para poder trabajar en la adaptación de organizaciones. Los invitamos a todos a dejar sus preguntas en la caja de preguntas y respuestas. Tenemos 2 allí y nos han dejado como unas 3 en el chat. Así que en este momento tenemos 5 preguntas activas, pero los invitamos a todos a hacer sus preguntas en esta caja para recibir un poco el feedback y las recomendaciones de John al respecto. Entonces, John, voy a empezar por la primera del cuadro de Q&A. Cuando nos presentabas el diagrama de relaciones y colaboración, donde veíamos el equipo amarillo un poco lejano de los demás, nos dicen un poco cuál es el comportamiento esperado de esas personas o de esos equipos representados por los puntos amarillos. Es decir, las que no se comportan de forma colaborativa, ¿qué esperaríamos o qué tendríamos que trabajar con ellos? Ahí, Jorge, si estás, déjame saber si es lo que querías saber.
Yeah. Perfect question. This is the perfect question. So when we really go into creating more adaptive organizations, we have to deal with at the agent level. And part of autonomy means that we need to do the self-organization, the management jobs that managers used to do. And that means collaborating. And it becomes an expectation. And so the type of language which I tend to work with is the idea of commitments. And so we might create workshops and coaching in order to say to people on a team who are not collaborating, we need to collaborate. We need this commitment. What is stopping you from collaborating? And we were working with what are the forces inside the team that stop them from collaborating. And there can be lots. They might have some sort of a personal issue with another team member. And so we might need to sort that personal issue out. They may feel in some way intimidated by the team. They may feel shy or that their knowledge is not valued. But if it is, then what we can do is we can teach the team to actively help that person collaborate. So collaboration is extraordinarily important, and people collaborate in different ways. Some people are very quiet, very introverted, and they can collaborate very well just online, no problem. Some people are very extroverted and they collaborate better. But what's most important is that we're slowly getting the organization or the teams to understand the importance of collaboration. So, a lot of my work, and if you look, anyone looks at my title, so one of the things I do, I say complex adaptive organization design, but I also do a thing called cultural change. And so often this is about changing the culture of the organization. So you change the culture from being a managerial culture. And managerial culture means that there's this clique of people called management, like a caste of people, and they do all of the managing. Well, that doesn't exist in an adaptive organization. Everyone's got to self-manage. We've got to self-organize. And so we have to teach the skills of management, of dialogue skills, of collaboration skills, of civility, being very civil to each other. And sometimes we also have to recognize that some people just aren't good at collaborating, and we have to make up our mind whether we need to keep them, or whether they need to be outside of the team. Maybe they can exist on the edge of the network as an advisor, or maybe if they're uncollaborative, maybe they have to leave.
Excelente. John, en el chat nos dejaron un comentario que quisiera preguntarte, y es, ¿esto de que nos has venido hablando se parece a Sociocracy o a Sociocracia 3.0?
It's fun. So Sociocracy is look, it's got some very good components to it. There is some similarities. There is a lot to learn from it, but Sociocracy is very structured. And so what I'm really talking about is a deeper layer. And how to explain it? So Sociocracy is talking they're very important things about decision rights and trying to reach consensus. And that is, in terms of collective computation, that's an algorithm. So what Sociocracy is offering you is some algorithms. What I'm sort of saying is that a more advanced way of looking at an organization is to see something like Sociocracy as an algorithm, but to also understand that there are many other dynamics involved. And the most important dynamic is this flow of adaptive information from outside the organizations into the teams, into the individuals. And once you start to understand how information flows and how it has to get to different parts of the organization, then your mind starts to see organizations in a different view. Because remember, it's not just people that are agents. Our agents could be an AI, an agent could be a policy. And so we have to also ask ourselves, how are these things interacting with the organization? And so complex adaptive systems science gives us the intellectual tools to be able to analyze that with a much greater granular, much finer detail than Sociocracy does.
Ok. Creo que estoy muy, pero muy de acuerdo contigo. Desde mi mirada también es mucho más profundo esto de lo que estamos hablando y mucho más retador para las organizaciones. Sociocracia ya nos deja como un marco a seguir. Aquí estamos hablando mucho más profundo de relaciones humanas y sistemas. Súper. Sofía Malca nos deja otra pregunta, John, y dice, en estas redes necesitamos roles cross que tengan una mirada, que tengan la mirada estratégica, un rol que hoy tienen los líderes o los jefes. En este modelo adaptativo, ¿quién tendría ese rol o esa mirada estratégica?
Right. Okay. Yeah, very good. Great question. Great question. And this really gets at the heart of this idea, this framework of an interpretive framework. And we're so used to, it's a bit like back in the 16th century, we're so used to the idea that we have to have the Earth at the center of the universe that we can't imagine the Earth spinning around the sun. It's just like it doesn't make sense to us. And it doesn't make sense to us that an organization can come up with its own strategy, but it can. So what we have to think about is, again, goes back to information. So information is coming in to the organization from the outside world, and the organization is making some sort of collective decision about what it wants to do. So let's stay with Zoom. Now, it's pretty clear that Zoom are in the video conferencing business. That's where the organization is. Now, whether the CEO said we're going to be in that business or whether people got around a table and said, let's be in that business, it doesn't really matter how the purpose of the organization, where it sits. So in a normal organization, the vision or the purpose, where we're going to go, sits at the top of the organization in the C-suite. But there's nothing in the science of complex adaptive systems that says that that purpose can't be endogenous. It can't exist at every level of the system. It can't be information, which is part of the agents, but also emerges from the conversations of the agents. So to try to help you here, if you think about a startup, and a startup, they might come together and they might say, we're going to produce, we've got this idea for a product. And there's a small team of people working together. And they come up with a product and they think it's going to be about helping people get to parties. Okay, let's create an app where one person can say, well, this is the best party and you can come over here and we can text message each other. But yeah, this is fine. But then somebody else in the team says, this is going very well, but people are using the same app to share other ideas, to share news snippets. And so the team can then say, well, let's go over here. Let's change it. Let's talk about it. Let's do this. Now, for those who are aware, I'm actually talking about Twitter. That's how Twitter started. It was a bunch of people, and they started off trying to do one thing, and they just moved, they pivoted, and there wasn't one person saying this is what we got to do. They spoke about where they want to go. It became a collective decision, and quite a successful one. And so the idea of actually having to hold the vision in a senior person is not true. It's not true. Now, one of the things which often manifests is that you often get certain people that become very good facilitators of ideas. They've often got some grey hair. They've been around for a while. In tribal language, we used to call them elders. So, we used, the wisdom of the elders. So sometimes there are people in the organization which seem to always have a wiser perspective. And the organization may choose to say, look, we can't make up our mind about this. What do you think? And they have an overriding decision. And that does happen a lot, and that is an option. But it's not mandatory. In terms of the design, you do not have to have a central figure, which then pushes down what's called downward causation. The downward causation could come from an idea, and that idea could emerge from the people in the organization. I hope that makes sense.
Gracias, John. Sofía nos dice que gracias también por el chat, así que los que preguntan, si nos dejan saber qué tan satisfechos o si tienen más dudas respecto a la pregunta y quieren profundizar, están súper bienvenidos. O si quieren abrir su micrófono también y levantar la mano, también súper bienvenido en este cierre de preguntas. Tenemos 4 preguntas más, John. Tenemos la de Paloma Vázquez que nos dice, ¿qué aspectos clave debería impulsar el CIO para promover la inteligencia colectiva y cambiar la estructura?
All right. Good question. So just let me think about how to answer this the best way I can using simple language. So think about in terms of a collective computation. So if you're the CIO, you understand the idea of computation. Now think about the organization as a whole. The whole organization as kind of a computer. It's not like the same. It's not the same rules of the computer that that we use every day, but it's human computation. What does a computer need in order for it to make a better computation? Processing power is good, but if we broke it down, there's a circuitry in there. There's transistors. So think about how information is flowing from the outside world into all the different agents in that organization. Can you get rid of noise? So for example, one of the things that we want to do is we really want to understand what the market is doing. So let's say if there is, we're a telecommunications company and we need to understand what information, adaptive information is important for us. And that is, there's a few things. So there's, what are the competitors doing? What are the customers doing? So you're trying to understand, the organization needs to understand what's happening so that it can make a prediction. So in that particular thing, so the CIO should be asking and bringing and assisting the organization to say, what is the information that's really, really important for you from outside the organization, and how do you bring it in? And then where does it have to go to? Who does it need to go to make decisions? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to facilitate the flow of adaptive information from outside the organization into the teams, between the teams, and to the individual agents. And that's what technology does. It creates platforms where we can share and collaborate. But one of the great jobs of information technologists is that you tend to understand a little bit more about information. So we can say, maybe we could use some data scientists in order to do some predictive analytics or to model what the market's going to do in the future, and then create a visual dashboard, like a fitness landscape, if you like, so that we really understand where the organization is at any point in time in the market. So that's what we're trying to do, is you're really trying to facilitate or optimize the flow of adaptive information from outside the organization into the teams and into the parts which are useful for the teams. So there might be information coming from new technology as well. So what information out there, what is emerging technology which can help the telecommunications? What's happening with 5G? What's happening with LIDAR? What's happening? Is this part of the conversation? And IT and C are tremendously important in this equation. You know, for so long, IT has been seen part of the plumbing, whereas really in an information world, IT becomes essential for the helping facilitate the flow of information and the visualization of information to all parts of the organization when they need it. Does that help?
Paloma, déjanos saber en el chat cómo te sientes con esta respuesta, que es la pregunta de John. Decido Lave nos pregunta, John, es este tema. Se plantea en las organizaciones adaptativas la eliminación de la jerarquía. Y la metáfora son los organismos vivos. ¿La jerarquía funcional no está presente en este tipo de sistemas?
It can just, yeah, I want to be very careful with the word. No, I understand. I want to be very careful. Yeah. No. That's okay. It's okay. It's okay. No. I understand the question. I'm trying to find the right language to help you out here. So functional hierarchy is a very interesting question. So in some ways, a cell, if you think about it, a cell has got a function. Think about it as let's go a kidney cell. So that kidney cell it belongs to a larger function, which is a kidney, right? And that kidney has also got a function within the body. And so you can say that there is a functional hierarchy. And sometimes we call this a nested hierarchy. And so the different cells have got different functions. And inside a cell, you've got the organelles. And these functions are nested. So in an organization, what we can find is that you can find that there might be a function such as marketing. Now, some organizations might say, we're going to distribute marketing. We're going to have little single marketing people in every team. Whereas other organizations say, no, we're going to have a central functioning marketing team. And they might have sub-functions within those. They might have sub-teams. But where it switches is that you're not having orders coming from managers. You are having behaviors which are changing based upon the information coming inside them. So the marketing organization, let's just say we've got the marketing function. And the marketing, it might be a big company. And so we've got a large marketing team. We've got people who are very good in growth hacking. We've got people very good in branding. And we might want to organize these teams that are kind of listening to what the organization needs. And so they might be working very close with sales. They might be working very close with strategy, product management. But rather than being told what to do, they are linking and communicating with the different cells of the organization that are required. And in terms of strategy, you've got these different cells, different different functions, and then you might have sort of a meta function. So you might remember back to the graph, I had this concept of a hypergraph. And so what you might do is you might have people from different functional units come together in a team or a meta team or a higher level team. And what they are doing is they're setting kind of the strategy. They're saying, well, I think we should be marketing more to Chile. Let's spend some more time in Chile because Chile's economy is very good. So let's spend some more time in Chile, and let's wind down Brazil because that's dominant. But it's not being forced down from a marketing manager. It becomes a collaborative decision. Does that help?
Sí, Jessita nos dice.
I also have to remind people that this is an introduction to either a 2 or 3 day course. So we've done a lot of information, a lot of these concepts. We have to yeah.
Así es. Y Yesid nos dice que está entendido y que sí, totalmente de acuerdo. Cuando lo representas y lo cuentas,
Okay.
caemos en cuenta que no hay jerarquía de poder. Sí hay jerarquía funcional, pero no de poder. Entonces, muchas gracias, John. Nos quedan 2 preguntas. Quiero hacerte primero la de Jorge Jiménez para hablar un poco y conectar esto con el tema de agilidad. Y es, ¿cuáles serían las metodologías ágiles o los frameworks de agilidad que más favorecen la adaptabilidad dentro de las organizaciones? Desde tu punto de vista, ¿cuáles crees que son esos frameworks que nos ayudan a ser más adaptables en la organización?
Great. Yep. So agile is now pure agile, not the fake agile, but the Agile Manifesto. Agile is completely convergent with what we're talking about. And so what agile methods give us are very good mechanisms for making collective computations. So Scrum, for example, is a very good way to organize work. If that work, if the outputs of those teams can be delivered incrementally and made up of the different functions. So Scrum is a perfectly good starting framework. Other teams might use Kanban. So when I'm actually doing the work, when we're getting these teams working together, I'm usually bringing agile methods into the team. And I will kind of pick and choose the methods that are most appropriate for each team. So, and I try to go to very first principles of agile all the time. So although on my last assignment, so I was actually certainly helping with their Scrum teams, I'd always try to get them to understand why we're doing it in the Scrum method and make sure all the time that was the most appropriate method and give them the skills to be able to change the method as well. Okay, because the good thing about Scrum, for example, is that it's got some really good practices and rituals built in. So the retrospective is an extraordinarily powerful tool. Other teams, they might even be a waterfall team, they can still do a retrospective and get a lot of benefit out of that. Because there are some types of work which still suit waterfall. If I was to build a skyscraper, I think I would prefer to see it built using waterfall rather than agile, because you don't want to change every floor based upon changing requirements. So the agile, the agile methods, and the principles and the practices, you've got this great, beautiful suite of really well worked out work mechanisms that you've got this toolkit that you can go in and go, actually, let's use Kanban. This is a much better way to organize Kanban. And it's actually, when I'm going in, it's one of the first things I do is I organize the workshops based on Kanban boards. And some people, this is a real revolution because they can start to see how information flows. So my answer to you is that the agile what do you call it? Body of knowledge, I suppose. The agile body of knowledge has got some fantastic stuff in it. My caution is always trying to impose Scrum or impose something on you. You want to kind of offer this to the teams as a way to work better, as a coach, and then but help them understand why it's working better. And that often goes back to information flow again.
Excelente, John. Gracias por la respuesta. Y Jorge nos dice que gracias. Y creo que desde lo que hemos aprendido de agilidad, que es parte del nombre de este webinar también, es lo que John dice, y es no entrar en un juego de un único marco como marco poderoso que todo lo puede y que nos va a volver más ágiles. En realidad son las herramientas las que si las usamos bien nos van a permitir tener ese flujo de información del que ha venido hablando John y ayudarnos a ser más adaptativos. La pregunta es qué queremos resolver y cómo generamos ese flujo de información dentro de nuestras organizaciones. Así que no podríamos estar más de acuerdo y también es uno de nuestros aprendizajes como Agility Changes de la agilidad en este tema de organizaciones adaptativas. Y bueno, con las preguntas del chat vamos a cerrar con esta que es de Ángela y es justo una de las preguntas que tienden a hacer más en estos espacios, John, y es un poco por dónde empezamos, cómo lo hacemos. Entonces, la pregunta de Ángela es, ¿cuáles son para ti esas etapas o esa línea que debería tener una organización para ser adaptativa en un futuro?
The stages, yeah. Okay. So you're talking about transitioning. It's
Así es.
So the transition is difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is really difficult for organizations. It's very, very, very difficult. Most of my engagements, I start going in at an agile work group. So mostly I get called in to help with agile teams or agile teams of teams, and slowly working with the organization to introduce these concepts. So it may be, for example, that we set up a bunch of agile product teams, and these are working well, and the organization wants to start to have more of these teams. And then what you find is that you start to hit up the agility and the adaptiveness of the teams start to smash up against the bureaucracy. Someone's trying to slow it down. And then we have to start to work with the senior management to start to get them to understand these ideas. And rarely will they go, oh, let's just, fire all of the managers and let's do this tomorrow. It'll be a slow process. And what you do is we need to undo the bits of bureaucracy one bit at a time. So for example, just a very simple one, performance reviews. So performance reviews are a classic bureaucratic managerial, we're going to control the worker. So one of the things we work with is just the idea of completely eliminating performance reviews. So the idea that you don't get a performance review from a manager, but we replace that with peer performance. So the idea that I'm in a team, and as a team, we all come up with what we think we should be doing to perform together, and we hold ourselves accountable to it. Now, it's like trying to remove a spinal cord. It's this, the organization, we can't get rid of performance reviews. But, if you keep working with them, if you get enough people, you know, you just say, let's just try it. Let's just try seeing how this works in this team over here. Run an experiment. Like, okay, yeah, the performance, that's good. Okay, well, what's next? Well, we're hiring. You know, why don't we get the teams to be responsible for hiring and firing? Oh, you can't do that. Blah, blah, blah. We can. So you get them to do that, and then bit by bit, you peel away the bureaucracy until all of a sudden this organicness starts to just become self-evident. But it's not overnight. It takes years of work.
Total, así se ve ir contra la burocracia y contra esas leyes preestablecidas y que fueron exitosas, finalmente no es algo sencillo de quitar de la mente, pues de quienes las han venido ejecutando. Eh,
That's right.
si nos pudieras decir tu experimento más exitoso en este ejercicio, ¿cuál sería, John?
Well, I suppose that the best one was my own business. So I ran my own business 15 years, and very much along those lines. It was very successful. We avoided hierarchy, and that's where I got a lot of my ideas from. So I did a master's in organizational development at the time. I studied complexity at the time. So that was probably the best one. But that's, you know, I exited that 6-7 years ago now. Recently, you know, I spoke to you about that peer review idea of actually getting rid of performance reviews. And this, you know, I was able to convince a fairly large organization to do this and to get rid of reporting lines and to really change all of the KPIs of these teams. And so we got rid of reporting lines. We got rid of, so instead of individual reporting lines, it became a group reporting. We got rid of performance reviews, and we got rid of KPIs. And so when I say KPIs, so individual KPIs, because the KPIs and the performance reviews were tied to each other. So we threw the individual KPIs out the window. We created a team or a collective, you know, KPI, because they still wanted KPIs. They needed to report it to the board, and we got rid of performance reviews. And everyone's happier. Everyone. The teams are happier. The people that are responsible have got more time. It's just like, why didn't we do that before? So there's lots of little wins like this, but this is early days. You know, in terms of in terms of really successful adaptive organizations, I mean, ones that are absolutely really there. There's Haier, the Chinese white goods manufacturer. Fantastic. So in a course I would go through. There's Bertshorg, the Danish nursing company. There's Morningstar, the Californian, and you know, there's a few more. I mean, I'm in an organization, we've got millions of organizations. There's only a few dozen really good case studies. It's very early on. So we are at the leading edge. We have just producing the Copernicus papers. We're still dealing with, you know, the geocentric mindset. It's going to take some time.
Total. Estamos iniciando con esto. ¿Qué libros, qué literatura, qué recursos nos recomendarías para seguir profundizando en este tema que es tan importante y tan apasionante, pues para muchos de nosotros que estamos aquí?
Okay, well, it depends. How much time do you have? Because if you've got a lot of time, then I can give you lots of resources. But yeah, look, I've got a little newsletter I started a few months ago, and what I'm doing, and you're welcome to it. Maybe we can send it out, and it's every Sunday a little article comes out, and It's around the subject, and that will link you to other resources. But it depends on so much what you're interested in. So some people are interested in the network side of things, you know, the network design. Some people are interested in the cultural design. Some people are interested in more of the paradigm. So it's pretty big. In order to, you know, we've got a course so this is part of you know, the adaptive organization design course. I was one of the people that designed it. One of the other guys was one of the architects of Morningstar. So, you know, it's a fairly well-designed course. And this is designed to take people and deeper into those. And then from that, then they can then build out their knowledge. But in order to really understand this, to really get it, you know, it's some serious work. So as a follow-up, I've got some links I can send you, but I think there is no one single book, unfortunately, or there's no even single authors that are doing this. You know, I'm one of a handful of people that are trying to make this accessible to people, to take the language of complexity science and turn it into organizational science. So yeah, we'll send out a copy of the slides, you know, tomorrow or the next day. I don't know when you're going to do it, Sandra. And I also have some other links that you can go to, some things that we spoke about. But without blowing my own, you know, I went to this newsletter, this post, it's called Post Bureaucracy, because there was just really nothing out there, no single source that's putting it all together. It's very new territory.
Genial. Y les hemos compartido a través del chat a todos ustedes tanto el perfil de John en LinkedIn para que se puedan poner en contacto directo con él y también su blog o esa página de la que él nos habla, que ahí están sus artículos por tema, súper bien referenciados. Desde Agility los recomendamos un montón, los hemos leído todos los artículos, John, hemos estado súper atentos a esta información que nos compartes. Así que, pues nada, muchísimas gracias. Y siendo las 9, 2 horas estuvimos conversando de este tema tan apasionante. Muchísimas gracias nuevamente a ti, John, por el tiempo, por tu generosidad de estar aquí, también en esta hora tan temprano para ti. Muchas gracias también a las personas. También muchas gracias a las personas que se quedaron hasta ahora.
Thank everyone. Thanks to everyone for listening and putting up with me. I very much appreciate it.
Gracias a ti. Con esto damos por cerrado este webinar. Recuerden que la grabación de este espacio, si lo quieren compartir, quedará en nuestras redes sociales. También les enviaremos el link de grabación a todas las personas que se registraron y los links que nos comparta John los compartiremos como comunidad que estamos creando en Latinoamérica. De verdad que muchísimas gracias a todos. John, si me regalas un minuto mientras van saliendo las personas y hacemos un pequeño cierre y listo. Muchas gracias a todos y nos vemos en el próximo evento de la agilidad. He aprendido con Agility Changes. Gracias a todos. Chao, chao.